Military marriage plus rebirth. Ning Yuan was reborn back in the 1970s. She no longer indulged in depression until death as a good woman, abusing the best, going to college, crossing the antique world, and striving for her career. Living in the eyes of others with a bad work style, never getting married, being shrewd and rich. Old girl but the eldest son of the Rong family in Beijing, who suspected her of being a spy all day long, handcuffed her and sneered, "Ning Yuan, how dare you pretend to be single? You will be imprisoned for bigamy." Ning Yuan was not afraid and shook her handcuffs with a smile, saying, "Do you, such a big leader, also forget? Isn't it that you want to marry secretly and not owe each other?" Rong Zhaonanchong didn't hear it and snorted coldly, "Little spy, where do you owe my child? Forget it. You've been arrested. You'll never be released from prison until the next life with me." Chapter 1. She slept in the same bed with her leader. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. In the dilapidated room, the man tied his belt and said calmly, "Think about it, should we apply for a marriage certificate or treat it as if nothing has happened?" Ning Yuan trembled and lay on a tattered bed, pulling on a torn blanket, rubbing the back of her head with one hand. She had all her clothes stripped off, and the back of her head was still painful and groggy after being hit with a stick. The man standing in front of the bed, with his broad shoulders and narrow waist bare, had a sturdy upper body, and his skin was dazzling white under the dim light. Ning Yuan was dizzy and couldn't figure out whether it was because of a headache or because she was shocked to see such a scene. She instinctively blurted out, "We didn't happen anything in the first place." She was knocked unconscious, stripped naked, and thrown into his shabby room. He was also doused with wine containing veterinary medicine and thrown in. But this man used inhumane willpower to suppress his instincts and crawled into the cold water tank to squat for half the night. Until the medicine wears off. He's a ruthless person. The man's hair and body were drenched with water. He expressionlessly flicked the wet bangs on his nose bridge behind his head and said, "Others wouldn't believe that a lonely man or a widow is naked in a room and nothing happens." Ning Yuan's originally unfocused pupils suddenly shrank. The man's face was delicately defined to a sharp edge, with water droplets flowing down his tall and narrow nose bridge. His slender and dark eyes were dazzled by the distant and cold light, and his upturned tail was slender and delicate, as if delicately drawn with meticulous brushwork. That is a handsome face that will make 21st-century girls scream in 40 years. In the 1970s, only men with a strong and resolute Chinese-style face could be called handsome. This is an unattractive little white face. Especially on one side of his forehead, there is a scar that disrupts his appearance, showing a cold, fierce and ruthless feeling that people nowadays dislike. "What are you looking at?" Rong Zhaonan noticed her gaze and frowned sharply. He hates people staring at his face the most. Rong Zhaonan raised his hand and pulled out his bangs to cover his eyebrows and eye scars, and casually put on his large black framed glasses. In this way, he looked like the unlovable, pale and indifferent village doctor again. Ning Yuan felt a bit dazed and closed her eyes, saying, "I didn't see anything, I just felt like there was nothing strange in the world." For example, she flipped through the old photos of herself jumping into the countryside several decades ago on the hospital bed, and fell asleep with sadness and regret. As a result, when I woke up on this thrilling night 40 years ago. If it weren't for the pain in the back of her brain being so real. If it weren't for the man in front of me who should only exist in the old photo, still standing in front of me alive. She thought she was in a dream, rather than a strange rebirth back to decades ago when she went to the countryside to cut in line. Rong Zhaonan's cold gaze moved away from her snow-white shoulder and said, "Although I don't know who will use me to harm you, but..." He paused and said, "Ning Jiqing, have you figured out what to do?" They stayed naked in a room, and he should be responsible to her. "I'm sorry for bothering you." Ning Yuan felt a bit dazed, if it were in the 21st century decades later. Not to mention being naked in a room, even if you sleep hundreds of times. You don't have to take responsibility for anyone. Rong Zhaonan pressed the large black mirror frame on his nose bridge expressionlessly and glanced at the crowd approaching the cowshed not far from the window. If you don't get married without a certificate, you'll have to think about how to get out of it. I'll try my best to help you. Dr. Rong, I'll get the certificate from you. Ning Yuan suddenly spoke up. Rong Zhaonan twisted his sharp eyebrows and said, "What are you saying?" He said he wanted to be responsible for her because in this era, a girl who lost her reputation could never marry, so he gave her a choice. But I was sent from the capital to a remote mountain village in Nanxi province to sweep cattle sheds, and sent to reform my thinking. Perhaps he will never leave the village for his whole life, and can only sweep the cowshed and become a barefoot doctor here. And the girl in front of him, if he remembers correctly, is an educated youth sent by Ningnan City to participate in rural construction, with new opportunities to return to the city every year. If she gets involved with him, she won't be able to return to the provincial capital of Ningnan. She chose to immediately get out of the back door now and not get involved with herself, which is the smart approach. Ning Yuan squeezed the blanket tightly, but still mustered up the courage to look up at him and said, "Dr. Rong, you're right. The villagers won't believe us like this." Nothing happened. She also saw the crowd coming towards the dilapidated house by the cowshed, wielding a torch outside the window. Initially, someone designed this game to ruin her reputation and prevent her from getting a spot for educated youth to return to the city. In her previous life, she chose to let Rong Zhaonan help her escape, leaving him alone to face those malicious people. He restrained his instinct not to harm her, but she left him blinded in one eye by those people. This is an extremely guilty thing in her life. Now there's a chance to salvage it, she can't let the old things repeat themselves. We must also make the person who harmed her pay the price. Follow me for evidence, maybe you won't be able to go back to the city for the rest of your life, doesn't it matter? Rong Zhaonan suddenly walked up to her, crossed his long legs, and looked down at Ning Yuan. Ning Yuan was run over by his sharp gaze behind the lenses, and her whole body was shivering. She instinctively kept her face down and bit her lips, saying, "It's okay, this is over. We can get divorced in the future." How could he possibly not return to the city? He was originally the son of a courtyard in the capital city. It is now the autumn of 1978, and in the near future, Rong Zhaonan will not only be able to return to the city, but also have a decent status and a high status. The impact of divorce on him is better than being blinded in one eye. Upon hearing this, Rong Zhaonan squinted his cold eyes. This girl has a small round face, a pair of eyes like black grapes, big and bright, and looks very agile when looking at people. It looks simple and upright, but how to handle marriage is very casual. What an unpleasant reputation does divorced women have, she doesn't know. Or perhaps she has a different purpose. But he didn't have time to speculate anymore, because outside the door, the noisy voices had already arrived. A female voice cried out, "I've seen it all. Ning Yuan was dragged into this cowshed and wasted. Help her quickly. Come out." A bastard surnamed Rong, even if he were to be sent to the village for renovation, he would dare to play rogue and strong. Quickly report to the commune and shoot the rapist. It's important to break in and save Ning Jiqing. Ning Yuan listened to the commotion and thought coldly, what a long-lost scene. But tonight, she will make a completely different choice from her previous life, and her fate will be changed in her own hands. Rong Zhaonan's corner of the eye jumped behind the black frame, and a chill flashed in his eyes. Suddenly, he looked at Ning Yuan and said, "You've made up your mind." Ning Yuan had calmed down and whispered, "I've figured it out, give me one of your clothes." Her clothes were all stripped off, and those bastards didn't even leave her in underwear, wishing she had been completely ruined. Rong Zhaonan immediately pulled out an old, washed grey work clothes from the tattered cabinet and threw them to her. Ning Yuan hurriedly put on her clothes. Rong Zhaonan's eyes were pricked by the snow-white and delicate softness that flashed over the girl's body. He immediately closed his dark eyes and pursed the corner of his lips. With a loud bang, the door was kicked open fiercely by someone. A group of people rushed into the door in an instant. Xiao Yuan, it's all my fault that caused you to be ruined by this bad person who was sent to transform you. Woo woo. A young girl with a square face wearing gray and blue work clothes and short hair that fits her ears rushed in. She fiercely tugged at Ning Yuan's arm, about to drag her out of bed. So that everyone can see clearly the way Ning Yuan was being spoiled by others. Tang Zhenjin, let go of me, let go. Ning Yuan's arm hurt as she forcefully pulled on her. She was wearing Rong Zhaonanchong's clothes, which barely covered her upper body, but she didn't have any pants. She was really dragged out by Tang Zhenjin, let so many people see her, and she really became the tattered shoe of everyone. How could Tang Zhenjin let go? She cried and pulled her torn quilt. Xiao Ning, we are all sisters. Let me see where you are injured. Everyone is gay. Don't be afraid. Ning Yuan looked at the hypocritical face in her memory, and disgust flashed in her eyes. In my previous life, I was so murdered that I couldn't recognize my biological parents, my work was suppressed, my husband cheated, and I spent most of my life suffering from depression. I owe half of the credit to Tang Zhenjin, my good friend. A cold light flashed in Ning Yuan's eyes, and she suddenly lowered her head and fiercely bit Tang Zhenjin's wrist. Is it because you can seduce people in Chapter 2? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ah. Tang Zhenjin was so painful that tears welled up. She raised her hand and rudely pushed Ning Yuan away. Ning Yuan was originally knocked on the back of her head, weak and dizzy. With such a push, she almost fell off the wooden bed. Rong Zhaonan was quick-witted and took a quick step forward, supporting Ning Yuan and helping her hold down the torn bedding that was almost torn off. Tang Zhenjin looked at her injured and bleeding wound, then at Ning Yuan leaning against Rong Zhaonan, feeling both pain and anger. Ning Yuan, this tattered shoe, dares to bite her. She immediately looked at the young man who had kicked the door open just now and said, Wang Jiqing, what are you so stunned about? Wang Jianhua watched as Ning Yuan leaned weakly against Rong Zhaonan's embrace. Although he knocked Ning Yuan unconscious and sent her into Rong Zhaonan's room with his own hands in order to grab the return to the city quota. But looking at this scene, he still felt a jealous evil fire in his heart. Wang Jianhua pointed a hoe at Rong Zhaonan and angrily cursed, You, a beast with a human face and animal heart, dare to harm our female comrade and kill him. Along with him, besides the angry educated youth in the youth camp, there were also many villagers. They already have prejudice against bad elements like Rong Zhaonan who were sent to transform cowsheeds. The commune has instructed us to discipline these bad elements, well, encourage them to work actively, and reform their thinking. The bad guy who transforms like this dares to harm the female educated youth. It's not an exaggeration to die. Just like blowing up a hornet's nest, everyone in the village was indignant and attacked Rong Zhaonan with hose and shovel. Rong Zhaonan's cold eyes flashed with a chilling murderous aura, and he clenched his fist with his veins exposed. Looking at the group of educated youth and villagers rushing towards him, he suddenly released his clenched fist. The man patiently closed his eyes and laughed self-deprecatingly. Hee hee. But the next moment, he suddenly felt like he was being pulled back by someone's hard work. The girl who was originally half leaning against his arms stood in front of him and shouted at the rushing people, Stop it, he didn't harm me. We're talking about a partner. This shout, like a thunderbolt, struck the heads of the indignant people in the room. The crowd froze, and the hose and shovel they raised froze in the air. Tang Zhenjin's eyes flickered with amazement, and then her mind turned on a whim, looking incredulous. Ning Yuan, what are you talking about? You're talking to this bad guy. The clothes on your body are his. Ha, Ning Yuan, this idiot, actually has a soft heart and protects Rong Zhaonan. That's best, she will never be the target for recruiting workers back to the city. Ning Yuan looked at her coldly and said, Yes, I am talking to Rong Zhaonan. Are you crazy? Wang Jianhua stared at Ning Yuan, staring incredulously. He has been pursuing Ning Yuan for so long, but she doesn't like him and even flirts with the youngest deputy secretary of the brigade. The indicators for recruiting workers to return to the city this time are so rare, only 2 indicators, and Ning Yuan has one, relying on her to get the deputy secretary. In a fit of anger, he teamed up with Tang Jinjin and knocked out Ning Yuan, stripping her naked, and sent her into the room of the villain who swept the cowshed in Rong Zhaonan, where he performed the play again. If Ning Yuan loses her reputation, she won't be able to pass the recruitment and return to the city assessment. But in 10 or 8 years, everyone will forget about this matter, and Ning Yuan may not have had the opportunity to return to the city. As a result, this foolish woman now actually sympathizes with Rong Zhaonan, saying that she is talking to this bad guy. Is she crazy? If she gets married and settles in the countryside, she will never be able to return to the city for the rest of her life. But Wang Jianhua opened his mouth and didn't say anything in the end. It was a middle-aged woman with sharp lips and monkey cheeks who followed in and sneered first, "Oh, so I can't resist loneliness. I'm wearing worn-out shoes. It's cheap, it's not cheap. I'm so angry that I'm on the bed of the bad guys." She is Tang Jinjin's second aunt, and of course she knows what Tang Jinjin wants to do, so she immediately fell into the trap and laid the stone. The villagers looked at Ning Yuan with contempt and disgust in their eyes. If my daughter sleeps with a man before marriage and stays in a pig cage before liberation. Disguising. Ning Yuan gritted her teeth and stared at the middle-aged woman. Firstly, Rong Zhaonan and I are talking about a partner. Unmarried men and unmarried women are not called making tattered shoes. Your daughter Xiaohua is also talking about a partner with the black man from the neighboring village, making tattered shoes and committing a crime. The middle-aged woman suddenly exploded and jumped up. What are you talking nonsense about? Ning Yuan ignored her and looked at the village branch secretary standing at the door with a frown. Old branch secretary, I don't know what Tang Jinjin saw. I accidentally fell into the river while playing pigsty by the stream. He saved me and brought me back to change clothes. There is a small stream by the cowshed, and everyone knows it. He and I have already decided to apply for marriage, and tomorrow I will go to the team to open a letter of introduction. Ning Yuan said sharply again. Her crisp and sharp words made the villagers and educated youth feel a bit dizzy. Everyone can see that she is defending Rong Zhaonan. Ning Yuan, your ideological consciousness is too low, you are actually mixed up with the bad elements who sweep the cowshed. Wang Jianhua's face turned blue with anger. Ning Yuan has always refused the pursuit of the 5 good young people in his team who have just been evaluated, but is she so protective of a man whom everyone has never seen twice and avoids? The old secretary finally knocked on the door with his pipe, frowned, and spoke. Since it was a misunderstanding, Ning Jiqing said he wanted to obtain a certificate from Dr. Rong, but no one said that the person who was transferred for renovation cannot get married. Let's all part ways. He doesn't want the educated youth and reformers who go to the countryside to cut in line to cause any trouble. If it goes to the educated youth office and the commune, their advance team's red flag will be gone, and collective work points will be deducted. The other people in the village all spoke up when they saw the old secretary, and they all continued to stay awkwardly. The big guy looked disdainfully at Ning Yuan beside the bed and turned around to leave. Tang Jinjin felt extremely happy in her heart, and she and her second aunt simply pulled away Wang Jianhua, who had a look of anger. She can't make Wang Jianhua jealous and mischievous, and ruin the marriage relationship between Ning Yuan and Rong Zhaonan, that bad person. Rong Zhaonan closed the leaking door and turned to look at Ning Yuan, who was sweating profusely and sitting on a wooden bed with a blanket in her arms. Behind his thick black frame, his narrow eyes flashed with an inexplicable light. Why are you helping me? Be attentive to nothing, neither deceit nor theft. Ning Yuan recognized the coldness and vigilance in his words and remained silent for a moment, because helping you is helping myself. Rong Zhaonan pressed the frame on the bridge of his nose, his gaze icy and sharp like that of an interrogator. Is that so? Talk about it. Ning Yuan didn't know when he stood in front of her, and the man stood very close. At a close distance, she could smell the cold breath on his body. Ning Yuan panicked and wanted to hide behind, "You go away." Rong Zhaonan looked at her guilty expression and instinctively raised his hand to hold onto her shoulder, coldly saying, "What are you hiding from?" Ning Yuan shrank her body, and the collarbone and shoulder under her collar were pinched by the man's big hand. The strange and unfamiliar touch made her blush and she couldn't help struggling. "What are you doing?" Struggling, the blanket suddenly fell to the ground. Chapter 3. You must get married with me. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Schwa. The blanket slipped off, and Rong Zhaonan felt a snow-white glare in front of him. Both of them froze at the same time. He instantly let go of his hand, turned his back, and dyed his ears a little red. It wasn't intentional, he said. Ning Yuan blushed and hurriedly pulled the blanket back, gritting her teeth and whispering, "Forget it. When I owe you." Yes, she owes him. I spared no effort to help Rong Zhaonan, except for owing him one eye before I was reborn out of guilt. Also, because she is reborn, knowing that he has a special identity, she will have decent experiences in the future and is a very powerful figure. I changed my choice of running away and leaving him behind, and instead helped him. Just for the future, when she needed it the most, he could lend her a helping hand. But even if she tells the truth, this big shot will probably still believe that she is talking nonsense about feudal superstition, lie to him. Ning Yuan could only say in a muffled voice, Even if I can escape their framing this time, there will be another time. It's better to make them feel like they've succeeded." She paused and added, "When they all return to the city, I'll figure out a way to get back to the city so they can't trouble you." Rong Zhaonan knew that the quota for educated youth to return to the city was limited, and their household registration was forced to be in rural areas. The educated youth are afraid that they will never go back in the future and will stay in the village for a lifetime to endure hardship and exhaustion. So in order to grab a spot to return to the city, there are all sorts of bad things to do. But the girl in front of me, judging from his previous experience in interrogation and investigation, she didn't finish telling the truth. He looked at Ning Yuan and said coldly, "Just figure it out." She was intentionally approaching him, afraid it was because of his background in the capital. "Don't worry, if she is sent by those people to harm him or has any malicious intentions, she will eventually reveal her true face." Ning Yuan glanced at Rong Zhaonan and felt a bit uneasy. Rong Zhaonan was demoted here and subjected to a lot of punishment. He doesn't trust people as easily as he does. Her reason may not necessarily make him let go of his guard. Never mind, she never thought of harming him, he will know in the future. "I need a pair of pants," Ning Yuan coughed lightly. Rong Zhaonan remembered the snow-white scene he had seen before, lowered his eyes, and turned around to flip through his broken 5-bucket cabinet for a while. He pulled out a pair of military pants that were also washed white, handed them to Ning Yuan along with a hemp rope, and then turned his back to stand by the window. Ning Yuan got up and quickly put on those pants. She tied the hem of her pants with hemp rope, tossed around for a while, and rolled up the hem several times before she could barely get off the ground. I couldn't help but click in my heart, this man's legs are really long. She glanced at Rong Zhaonan's back, as tall and slender as a white poplar and a green mountain, with a coldness that kept strangers away. Even after experiencing various torments such as being fired and being sent down to the cowshed, he couldn't bend his spine. Ning Yuan hesitated for a moment and said, "I'll go back first. Tomorrow, we'll go to the brigade to open a letter of introduction before we can go to the county marriage office to collect the certificate." Rong Zhaonan turned his face to look at her and said calmly, "I can't leave the village casually, you should know." Ning Yuan just remembered that he was sent here for renovation. "In addition to sweeping cattle sheds and working in the fields, I also participate in village study classes and write about my experiences in renovation." He also needs to undergo regular checks on the team's red armband and cannot leave the village. Ning Yuan realized that she had thought too simply. She rubbed her temples and felt another pain in the back of her head, saying, I'll figure out how to solve it tomorrow. Fortunately, in this era, although wedding photos have already been taken, there is still no need to stick photos of the two on the marriage certificate. Watching Ning Yuan hurriedly leave, Rong Zhaonanchong took off his big black-framed broken glasses. The man stared at her back with a pair of cold Ruifeng eyes, deep and unfathomable. Ning Yuan returned to the Educated Youth Center, and Tang Zhenjin and two other female educated youth were talking. As soon as she walked in, they didn't speak. In the past, the relationship between educated youth was actually good. After all, young people left their hometowns together to work in unfamiliar rural areas. Since the start of the quota for educated youth to return to the city, another group of people who came together have returned to the city. The mentality of the remaining people has changed, with anxiety, jealousy, and fear of staying in the countryside for a lifetime and not being able to return to their parents in the city. Ning Yuan also held on to the recruitment targets in her previous life, so she was afraid of damaging her reputation and affecting her return to the city. But now that she has been reborn and returned, she knows that the return of educated youth to the city will begin, and she is not in a hurry. Ning Yuan ignored them and took a hot kettle to fetch water for herself, preparing to go back to her room and clean herself. Tang Zhenjin squinted her eyes and stood up in front of her, looking heartbroken. Ning Yuan, you're crazy. How can you be a good person in the village in the future? What if Li Yang'a finds out that you slept with the bad elements sent down? Upon hearing Li Yan's name, Ning Yuan suddenly turned her face and stared at Tang Zhenjin. Tang Zhenjin, do you think if you ruin me, Li Yan will take notice of you? Why does this woman still have the face to put on airs in front of her? If it weren't for her deceiving him out, Wang Jianhua wouldn't have had the chance to knock her unconscious and send her to the cowshed. Rong Zhaonanchong has strong willpower. If they throw her to some other old bachelor or thug, her innocence will be ruined. Tang Zhenjin's face instantly turned red, and a cold light flashed in her eyes. Why, are you not behaving properly and slandering the revolutionary emotions of the rest of us? Li Yan is the youngest brigade secretary under the commune, a handsome young man in his early 20s. He has culture, a promising future, and great power in his hands. Many female educated youth have a good impression of him. But he seemed to only look at Ning Yuan differently, which made Tang Zhenjin and others very jealous. Huang Xiehong, with a chubby black face and a violent temper, jumped out of bed and spat at Ning Yuan. Pooh, it's clearly your moral and ideological corruption, sleeping with bad elements. Get out of here and don't tarnish our educated youth points. Ning Yuan's gaze coldly swept over Tang Zhenjin and Huang Xiehong, as well as a female educated youth named Qin Xiaoxia who remained silent but had a disdainful look in her eyes. She said, I suggest you don't bother me, anyway I can't go back to the city anymore, I don't mind dragging people down. In her previous life, how foolish she was to treat the three of them as good friends. She sent some delicious food from home, even if she didn't eat it herself, she wanted to please them. One of them wanted to harm her, and the other two didn't even want to ask her what exactly happened. After finishing speaking, she shook her braids and carried the basin into the miscellaneous room. A few people looked at Ning Yuan, who had always been gentle, shy, and easy to deceive. She suddenly changed into a different person and looked at each other, but was suppressed for a moment. Ning Yuan returned to the room, put down the basin, immediately opened her small box, and took out a small brocade bag from the deepest part of the box. Inside is a delicate jade chili pepper with a little finger length, worn with a faded red string. This is a jade bracelet made by grinding one of the 3 pieces of jade after being broken into 3 pieces. Ning Yuan sat down by the window holding jade chili peppers and breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, carrying memories from a previous life, I returned to the time before she sent out this jade chili pepper. I will never give Tang Jinjin the only token left by my biological parents as I did in my previous life. Letting her use this thing has harmed herself for a lifetime. Ning Yuan rubbed the jade chili pepper. In her previous life, at this time, she didn't know that her current parents were not biological. There are 4 children in the family, and although the eldest brother is the one who was adopted, her parents have been colder towards her since childhood than the eldest brother. After going to the countryside, other parents of educated youth all try to help their children find urban indicators, but only their families ignore her. In her previous life, even if she was not successfully framed by Tang Jinjin and Wang Jianhua, she stayed alone in the village until the end, becoming the last person in the educated youth team to return to the city. Ning Yuan had a mix of flavors, but suddenly felt something cold peeking at her outside the window. She suddenly lifted her head and looked out the window, but there is nothing outside the window except for the courtyard under the moonlight. Ning Yuan frowned, feeling that it was her own illusion, and carefully put away the jade chili peppers again. She started taking off her clothes and was ready to scrub her body with hot water. In the concealed area of the roof not far from the window, Rong Zhaonanchong's cold eyes flashed with a thought-provoking light. Chapter 4. Who is not good for you to sleep with? You are listening at novelfull.audio. What is she hiding? Rong Zhaonan rubbed the mountain opener in his hand thoughtfully. In the other hall, several female educated youth gathered together and murmured. Ning Yuan is not shameless. She messes up her own shoes and dares to slander you. Huang Xiehong scolded angrily. Forget it. Tang Jinjin shook her head with an understanding expression. She lowered her eyes and said, Ning Yuan's thinking is backward, and she's mixed up with bad elements. Let's just ignore her. In the small group of female educated youth, Tang Jinjin has always been the leader, and it is easy for her to isolate and manipulate anyone. Huang Xiehong pouted and said, Jinjin, you have such a good temper. Ning Yuan used to follow behind you like that, but now she dares to get angry with you. Tang Jinjin looked at the curtain of the miscellaneous room and a cold light flashed in her eyes. It's okay, everyone is gay, she said. Ning Yuan bit her so hard today, and the account hasn't been settled yet, let alone just now daring to reveal her feelings for Li Yan in person. What if this statement spreads and makes the recruiters think she's making friends here, affecting her return to the city? She insisted on giving Ning Yuan a lesson. Tang Jinjin's eyes rolled and she made up a malicious idea in her heart. Ning Yuan didn't sleep soundly all night, always dreaming about modern times and cutting in line. I also dreamed that someone was always watching her every move in the dark. Until she woke up and looked at the dilapidated educated youth dots, she once again confirmed that she had truly returned to decades ago. And yesterday she made a choice to change her destiny. To marry Rong Zhaonan. But no one knows whether this is a good choice or a bad one. Ah. Ning Yuan rubbed her eyebrows and sighed. She glanced and saw that the other 3 beds were already empty. The 3 of them had already gone to work and no one called her. Ning Yuan doesn't mind either. She had planned to take a leave from the team today to write a marriage introduction letter, and her work points will be deducted. She sat up expressionlessly and began to dress. The educated youth can't be fooled anymore, not to mention that they have any bad ideas. She feels nauseous just by seeing Tang Jinjin and the others. After a simple wash, Ning Yuan took an old suitcase and put on her clothes, enamel cups, towels, and toothbrushes. My stomach started growling. In this era, there was already a shortage of food and drink. She didn't eat anything last night. Ning Yuan opened the cabinet and wanted to make some pickles and porridge by herself. But when her gaze fell on Tang Jinjin's bed, she immediately narrowed her eyes. She closed the broken cabinet and rudely dragged out Tang Jinjin's suitcase, opening it directly. Take out a square red biscuit box from under 2 layers of clothes. There are half a pack of oil paper cookies and 6 or 7 big white rabbit milk candies inside, as well as Zhang Xinxin's 5 yuan large steel mill. Tang Zhenjian treasures these cookies and sugar very much, they are rare items. Sent from Shanghai. Ning Yuan rudely filled her lunchbox with some hot water and started eating the biscuits. She wouldn't feel embarrassed. These were all sent to her by her cousin and were coaxed by Tang Zhenjian. The educated youth in the village have no relatives or friends. In order to integrate into the small group of Tang Zhenjian, she often voluntarily pays tribute to them. But now she has to take root in the village and tear herself apart from Tang Zhenjian. What's the need for patience? After eating 4 or 5 cookies and calming her stomach, she packed the remaining cookies and sugar together into a luggage box. She carried a blanket on her back, dragged a suitcase and a kettle out of the door, and walked towards the dilapidated cowshed where Rong Zhaonanchong lived. At this point in the morning, the villagers and educated youth all went to work. The dilapidated cowshed where Rong Zhaonanchong lived was located in a remote area at the foot of the mountain, and he did not encounter 2 people along the way. This actually breathed a sigh of relief for Ning Yuan. She didn't want to hear people mocking her early in the morning. As she walked down a forest path carrying her old suitcase, a figure suddenly flashed out and stood in front of her. Ning Yuan frowned as she looked at the visitor and said, "Wang Jianhua, what are you doing here? Move away." Wang Jianhua has a long face, with a split hair, wearing gray and blue work pants and an old cotton shirt, with a dignified appearance. He just stared straight at Ning Yuan, both jealous and resentful, and said, "You can't wait to live with that bad guy. Who can't sleep well with you, sleeping with that kind of person?" His vulgar language made Ning Yuan nauseous. She looked at him coldly and said, "Isn't it as you wished? I'm sure I won't be able to get a job offer now. What else do you want?" Wang Jianhua stretched his face and glared fiercely at her. "It's not because you don't want to talk to me about a partner. If you want to talk to me about a partner, I wouldn't do this to you. Why don't we go back to the city together?" Ning Yuan said disgustedly, "Even if you're such a disgusting person, I wouldn't talk to you when I talk to dogs. If she doesn't get it, she will destroy it. This kind of despicable man always makes her sick." As she spoke, she was about to carry her luggage and avoid him. But the next moment, Wang Jianhua suddenly hugged her as she passed by and roughly dragged her into the nearby forest. "Anyway, you even slept with people like Rong Zhaonanchong, so why don't you sleep with me too?" This little slut, he pursued her with all his heart and soul, but she slept with the cowshed reformers like Rong Zhaonanchong and wanted to marry her. Women are so despicable. Whoever falls asleep will be completely devoted to them. Ning Yuan's face turned pale with fear and she struggled desperately, "Oh. Wang Jianhua, let go. The crime of hooliganism will be executed by firing squad." Wang Jianhua sneered and reached out to cover her mouth, saying, "Yesterday, everyone knew you were a slut who slept with people casually. You said you were raped by a young man from my team who had just been rated as an advanced member of the 5 Good Youth. Does anyone believe that?" As he spoke, he pressed Ning Yuan onto the ground. Ning Yuan was extremely angry, trembling with nausea all over her body. This beast, the box fell to one side, the things scattered all over the ground, and the small scissors for cutting hair fell nearby. She held a pair of small scissors in her hand, her eyes showing hatred, and raised her hand to stab Wang Jianhua in the body. But there are people who are faster than her. With a loud bang, accompanied by the sound of bone fractures, Wang Jianhua screamed and was kicked away. "Ah!" At the next moment, Wang Jianhua was thrown out sharply by someone, and then rolled down the ditch on the right side of the forest with a gurgling sound. He hit a stone with a thud on his head, let out a bloody groan, and fainted in the ditch. A tall figure stood in front of Ning Yuan in the backlight, and the sunlight coated his figure with a cold golden color. Ning Yuan stared blankly at him and said, Rong Zhaonanchong. Are you okay?" The man's cold, blade-like gaze came over, and Ning Yuan instinctively shrank. That is a cold and ominous aura. Only those who have seen blood and have had many lives on their hands will have this ominous aura. She had seen this kind of evil energy in a retired Vietnam War veteran in her previous life. 3 armed robbers were twisted and their necks were broken by a few moves from the veteran. Get up. Rong Zhaonanchong extended his hand to her, and under his rolled-up sleeves, his slender arms were smooth and full of explosive force. Ning Yuan instinctively shrank. That is a fear instinct of humans facing predators like wild beasts. She didn't dare to hold his hand and got up in a panic, her face a bit pale. I'm okay. I'm fine on my own, she said. He is very powerful. Why was he drugged by Wang Jianhua, and even when those people in the village wanted to beat him, he didn't resist. In his previous life, he was blinded in one eye. Rong Zhaonanchong looked at the little girl in front of him like a rabbit seeing a wolf, and he curled his lips. Didn't you be quite bold and calm last night? Just now, she was so fierce that she dared to stab someone who wanted to insult her with scissors, but she was afraid when she came here. It's because she's naturally quite sharp. Or is it because she has an unpredictable heart and already knows his background and past identity that she is afraid? Rong Zhaonanchong's deep eyes flashed with unpredictable light behind the black frame. He suddenly reached out and clasped her wrist, seemingly unintentionally pulling her into his arms with a clever force. Ah! Ning Yuan stiffened all over. Chapter 5. The Little Spy is quite popular. You are listening at novelfull.audio. What's going on? Ning Yuan was startled and shuddered, instinctively looking towards Rong Zhaonanchong. Although he was tall, thin, and refined, she felt a sense of oppression. At this moment, the man released his grip on her and lowered his head to let the bangs fall on the frame of the mirror, blocking his eyes. I'll help you pack your luggage, have your things come loose. By the way, check what's in her luggage. She didn't know what was hidden last night. He had to withdraw as soon as she took off her clothes last night. Just gave her a hug. She doesn't have any muscles on her body, it doesn't look like she's been trained. The man in front of him regained his cold and dull, honesty appearance. Ning Yuan was taken aback for a moment. The cold feeling of the blade pressing against her flesh just now was just her illusion. Thank you, please. She could only look down awkwardly at her scattered luggage. When she had a fight with Wang Jianhua just now, her torn suitcase just scattered. Some things have rolled into the ditch, so the two of them went to collect and pick them up together. Fortunately, there weren't many things, so Ning Yuan picked them up for a while and found that they were almost there. But, here. A slender hand handed over 2 old white bras. Ning Yuan's face instantly turned into a small red flower. My goodness, she hurriedly grabbed the bra and stuffed it into the box without patting the grass on it. But the next moment, the big hand casually handed her a small pair of underwear and said, "Your underpants have also fallen off the edge of the groove." Ning Yuan remembered the saying from later generations. Social death. She quickly grabbed it again, lowered her head and looked around to see if there were any shorts or underwear left. No more. The man's cold voice sounded above his head. Ning Yuan finally breathed a sigh of relief, put on the bedding on her back, and quickly fastened the box. "I'm fine, let's go," she said. Rong Zhaonanchong looked at the girl with her head lowered in front of her, her white ears turning red. "How dare you approach him despite being so shy? Being a spy doesn't even have the ability." He raised his eyebrows slightly and took the box from her hand, saying, "Give it to me." With nothing in her hand, Ning Yuan carried the box and walked forward. She quickly followed up and said, "It's too much trouble for you." Looking at his ear and back, Ning Yuan couldn't help but mutter, "This man is really tall, at least 1.86 meters. She's less than 1.6 meters away. In front of him, she's completely like a dwarf." The two of them entered the small dilapidated tiled house by the cowshed, one in front and one behind. This was originally used to pile straw for cows to eat, but after Rong Zhaonanchong was laid down, it became his residence. There was air leakage on all sides, and I barely covered it with newspapers. 2 broken door panels from somewhere were placed on a wooden frame, making it a bed. There were also 2 5-drawers that had fallen out of the door, containing his clothes and things for washing, and a small bag of coarse rice was placed in the cabinet. The large water tank is placed in the corner of the wall. A lame old table was picked up with stones under it, 2 barely intact benches and an oil lamp, as well as an old basin and enamel floor. Basically, at first glance, his belongings are all here. Ning Yuan didn't have time to pay attention to the environment of the cowshed last night. Now that she sees it this way, her eyebrows immediately jump. This little brother probably didn't cross over from before the liberation, he is the poorest family in the village. There is also a pungent smell of fermented cow dung outside. He is not like a reborn person, but he does not know that the social situation will undergo earth-shattering changes in the future. How does this man from such a good background face an environment where he may have to spend his entire life like this? Why, do you still want to move over? Rong Zhaonanchong looked at her face and coldly pressed his big black glasses. The environment here is much worse than that of educated youth. Jiqingdian is a newly built small tiled house in the village. Although everyone is poor and has nothing to do with it, it is definitely much better than a dilapidated cowshed house. Ning Yuan gritted her teeth and said, moving, acting, and making a complete set. We are husband and wife. Pack up and tidy up, it will always be better. She doesn't want to go back to the educated youth camp and live with people like Tang Jinjin and Wang Jianhua. Rong Zhaonanchong squinted as he watched her put down her luggage and make up his mind to stay. This little spy has a lot of perseverance. Just now, he calmly touched her luggage and didn't see what she had hidden last night. Ning Yuan placed her box next to the chest of drawers, glanced at the roof that was leaking and could see the sky, and wanted to sigh. The southern rural areas are damp and rainy, with rain outside and light rain inside. How does this person live? We need to find a way to repair the roof, Ning Yuan muttered. Rong Zhaonanchong glanced at the roof and couldn't help but, Ning Yuan turned around and went to pack her things. The enamel jar is set up, the towel is hung with hemp rope, and the clothes are put away. When she hugged the bedding and looked at the bed, she froze. There's only one bed made of those 2 broken wooden doors. She looked around and found no other place to sleep in the dark room. Rong Zhaonanchong watched with ease as she planned what to do. Ning Yuan's delicate eyebrows twisted, and then under his gaze, she walked over and pushed his pillow and bedding inside. Then, she placed her bedding on the outside door panel. Why, you want to sleep with me? Rong Zhaonanchong raised an eyebrow. Just now, he looked like a rabbit seeing a wolf. Now that the rabbit has a fat belly, dare to sleep in the same bed as the wolf. She awkwardly smiled and said, I've wronged you first, Dr. Rong. Let's make do with it, and I'll find the village team to see if there's any other way. Rong Zhaonanchong looked at her and said, You're not afraid of me really doing something. The little spy intends to use the beauty trick, and the sacrifice is quite significant. Ning Yuan didn't know that she was being treated as a malicious, little spy, by others. She raised her eyes and smiled, Dr. Rong, if you were someone like Wang Jianhua, you wouldn't have endured so much hardship last night. She is not a fool. She lived for decades in her previous life, and she still has confidence in this aspect. Besides, he came from a large courtyard and later became such a great leader, but his personal life has always been very good. Rong Zhaonanchong paused and tugged at the corner of his lips, saying, You can easily trust people. The girl in front of him looked at him seriously, with big black grape-like eyes full of trust. This woman is quite skilled in acting. Do they know each other well? She looks very knowledgeable about others and seems to have done a lot of homework. Is it because of his background or because he used to work in a special unit? Ning Yuan didn't know what he was thinking. She packed up and said to Rong Zhaonanchong, Dr. Rong, please be busy first. I'll go find the village team to provide a marriage certificate and introduction letter. Rong Zhaonanchong said without hesitation, It seems that she came prepared for such an easy matter as divorce. Ning Yuan carried her ID into the old green shoulder bag and turned to walk outside the door. As soon as she walked to the door, she remembered something again. She turned around and flipped out 2 cookies and 2 big white rabbits, which she placed in Rong Zhaonan's hand. She smiled gratefully at him, her big eyes curved into a small moon, and said, "Dr. Rong, thank you for saving me again this morning." Rong Zhaonan looked at the cookies and big white rabbit milk candy in his hand, and then at her big eyes. This is a rare and precious snack, even more precious than rice, which he never lacked in his youth. Now he has been renovating it for a few years, not to mention milk candy and cookies, he hasn't even tasted any yellow sugar. Even if everyone here grows sugarcane, it's not his turn to be a modified molecule to eat. Ning Yuan waved her hand and hurried away. Rong Zhaonan didn't hesitate and calmly ate the biscuits. Then, he peeled off a piece of candy paper from a big white rabbit milk candy and put the white flower-shaped milk candy in his mouth. The sweet milk flavor soaked on the tip of the tongue, somehow giving off a hint of Ning Yuan's scent. He glanced at Ning Yuan's small flower pillow on the bed, licked her delicate lips, and rolled the crumbs into his mouth. "TSK, the little spy is quite impressive." Rong Zhaonan got up and walked towards the bedside, then picked up Ning Yuan's pillow and reached out to explore every inch of her pillow. Chapter 6. Encountering my ex-husband brother again. You are listening at novelfull.audio. After fumbling for a while, his fingertips paused when they touched a small hard object inside. Rong Zhaonan Ruifeng's eyes lit up with a gleam. They had found it. Last time I helped her pick up her luggage, he even searched for her underwear, but couldn't find what she had hidden. Originally hidden in the pillow. Rong Zhaonan took out a small faded velvet bag from his pillow and poured out a jade chili pepper. He pointed the jade chili pepper in his hand towards the light by the window and saw a seal-carved character, Ning, on it. This jade chili pepper has a deep green color, excellent water head, and exquisite carving. It looks like everyone's handwriting. What are the conditions for Ning Yuan's family to have such top-notch jade handpieces hidden? Rong Zhaonan's suspicion deepened as he pondered. Before going to the village team office, Ning Yuan spent over an hour visiting the supply and marketing cooperative near the commune. I painfully spent $1 from my only $3 to weigh a paper bag of fruit candy. It was almost noon when she arrived at the village team office. The old secretary watched as she came in carrying something and frowned. "Ning Jiqing." Ning Yuan coughed lightly and placed the fruit candy on the table, feeling a bit embarrassed. "This is Shitong, thank you to the old secretary for speaking to me yesterday." The old secretary was taken aback for a moment, then lowered his pipe and frowned. "Ning Jiqing, do you really have a plan to get married to that lower-ranking reformer? This fruit candy is not cheap either. Nowadays, villagers only buy candy during festivals and weddings. She is also the most beautiful little girl, and she is from the provincial capital. Why can't she just think so hard?" Ning Yuan sighed and said, "Old secretary, do you think I can still have this reputation without obtaining a certificate? Will the people from the recruitment office of Ningnan's silk mill still want me?" The old secretary lifted his eyelids and glanced at her, then lowered his head and smoked a hookah without saying a word. Last night, Ning Yuan suddenly became a partner with Rong Zhaonan, and they were still in the same room. They had never had much interaction before. He also knows that something is wrong. He has heard of the incidents caused by the educated youth who went to the countryside in the past 2 years in order to compete for the city quota. But, as Ning Yuan said, if she doesn't obtain the certificate, her reputation will only stink on the street. Who would want a bad lifestyle and moral decay? Even if the people in the recruitment office had originally been interested in Ning Yuan, and such a situation arose, they would not give Ning Yuan the quota for recruiting workers back to the city. "Okay, then I'll have the clerk issue a certificate for you." The old secretary sighed and nodded. "It's this girl, pitiful, she's going to lose herself for a lifetime. Ning Yuan could tell from the expression of the village chief that the old chief sympathized with her. What she needs is this sympathy. Ning Yuan sat down and eagerly looked at the old branch secretary. Old branch secretary, you see, Dr. Rong cannot leave the village, but we need to go to the county office to obtain the certificate. What should we do? Their village is not far from the city of Nanning, only over 40 miles away, but Rong Zhaonanchong cannot leave the village. The old secretary frowned. This is a question. There are matters related to the marriage of educated youth here, but there are indeed no special members who can still get married without being assigned to the cowshed for renovation. Can I ask someone to help me pick it up? Ning Yuan frowned as she looked at the old secretary and carefully gestured. She thought about it all the way, but in this era, there were no cameras, facial recognition, or household ID card networking. It's not surprising to have a marriage certificate issued on behalf of someone else. As long as she can provide Rong Zhaonanchong with a good certificate in a team, and then find a man to go to the county to obtain the certificate, don't speak recklessly. The old secretary was taken aback and looked at her expression, which was a bit strange. The girl in his impression is an honest child, mostly introverted and silent, buried in work and doing things, and willing to work hard. Can you think of a way to collect the certificate on behalf of me? Ning Yuan lowered her cold eyes and looked helpless. Otherwise, what else can I do? No name, no point. If she obtains a certificate with Rong Zhaonanchong, she is legally married. At least, if that bastard Wang Jianhua dares to harass her again, not to mention that he still wants to return to the city, it will be the crime of harassing women and hooliganism. She has lived a lifetime longer than others, where could she still have the bousy personality of her teenage years? After all, beating a dog with meat buns can only lead to no return. The old secretary saw the little girl's pitiful and lethargic appearance, and sympathy once again gained the upper hand. He pondered for a moment and said, "Okay, I'll have someone issue a certificate for you first. Tomorrow, I'll have Huazi go to the county to collect a batch of pesticides and also help you obtain the certificate." Huazi is the third son of the old branch secretary's family, and he is also an honest and straightforward person. Ning Yuan suddenly became happy and stood up, bowing to the old secretary. "Thank you very much, old secretary. You, take the sugar back, life won't be easy in the future." The old secretary shook his head and pushed the fruit candy back. He has 3 sons of his own, and his only youngest daughter is the same age as Ning Yuan. It's inevitable that he thinks this girl has jumped into the fire pit. Following a man with poor composition, not to mention becoming a soldier or looking for a job for future children. Reading and studying are difficult, and one can only achieve nothing for a lifetime. Ning Yuan shook her head and held down the candy, saying, "You helped me, this is shitang. Give it to Xiaoguo and the others to eat." The old secretary's family may have several grandsons and granddaughters. She needs to do her favor well. The old secretary saw her resolute refusal to accept it and thought to herself, well, there are still some old office furniture and other items that were previously exchanged in the village primary school warehouse. Please see if there are any that can be used and find a cart to tow them back to the cowshed. Although Rong Zhaonanchong treated the villagers, his pockets were cleaner than his face, and he was so poor that he jingled. He is also aware of the situation in the dilapidated cowshed. Upon hearing this, Ning Yuan was extremely happy. It was an unexpected joy, and she bowed to the old secretary, saying, "Thank you, old secretary." The team swapped it out, and if it can be used, it's a good thing. Can't it be worse than Rong Zhaonanchong's shabby house-like beggar before liberation? Ning Yuan quickly borrowed the cart, put on the cart rope, and dragged the cart towards the direction of the cowshed at the foot of the mountain. Rong Zhaonanchong cannot leave the village, but he can move things with her in the village. It's already noon after work, and many villagers and educated youth are going back to eat. Watching Ning Yuan dragging the cart and burying her head as she walked, no one greeted her, only whispering from a distance. After all, she is a person who is a mix of self-indulgent and reformers. Tang Zhenzhen, Huang Xiehong, and Qin Xiaoxia were carrying hose and watching Ning Yuan's appearance. Huang Xiehong gloated and said, "Look at her bad luck, she deserves it." But Tang Zhenzhen's eyes flashed with suspicion. Strangely, Ning Yuan didn't look like she had been spoiled by Wang Jianhua. Did that guy Wang Jianhua fail? Ning Yuan was too lazy to pay attention to the gazes of others. She dragged the cart back to the cowshed and cottage at the foot of the mountain. From a distance, she saw Rong Zhaonan being held in the corner by 4 or 5 people wearing red armbands. She was startled, threw down the cart, and ran towards the cowshed. "Comrades, what's wrong? What's wrong with this?" She and Rong Zhaonan are both at a loss now, at least until Rong Zhaonan returns to the city, she cannot let him have any trouble. At this moment, a medium-sized, sturdy and upright figure emerged from the cabin. "Ning Yuan, don't be afraid." The fact that Rong Zhaonan played hooligans and insulted women is already known in the brigade. Looking at the other person, Ning Yuan was stunned. The young man in front of him, wearing a worker's hat, is a typical Chinese character face that is most popular in aesthetics nowadays. He has a straight nose, single eyelids, and upright eyebrows and eyes. The man wore a rare sea sole shirt from the village, a green military coat on the outside, and dark blue workwear pants that made him look very heroic. Ning Yuan stared blankly at the young man for a moment, involuntarily clenching her fist, mixed with various flavors. "Li Yan. Secretary Li. He is the team secretary in charge of several village teams, and also her husband from her previous life." Chapter 7. Will you marry your husband again in this lifetime? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Li Yan softened his stern expression when he saw the girl with big eyes in front of him. He took a step forward and said, "Ning Jiqing, you are all your comrades. Don't be afraid. We are here, we will protect you and severely punish the bad elements." Ning Yuan's expression was complex and absent-minded. She and Li Yan have been married for decades, without the exaggerated plot of being killed by her husband and mistress in most novels. Li Yan comes from a legitimate and upright background, and handles affairs fairly. He became the youngest brigade secretary in the commune at an early age. They were introduced to her when she cut in line, and later freely fell in love. Li Yan later studied at the Lin Academy and became a young and promising state-owned enterprise cadre. At the age of 30, he had become the youngest state-owned enterprise department-level cadre in the province. And she has always been a small worker in an ordinary unit, and everyone says she was lucky enough to become the wife of the director. But as Eileen Chang once said, life is like wearing a robe full of lice. She worked too hard in the silk spinning factory, working 3 shifts, getting pregnant and having to do household chores. She worked hard day and night, and had 3 miscarriages. In the end, he wanted to have a child, so he was willing to help her transfer to the cashier position to avoid her old miscarriage. He was busy with work for only a few days a year at home, and complained that she couldn't have a son, had low education, and had no common language with her. He has a hot temper and curses people at home whenever he feels uncomfortable. Later on he has a talented female journalist from a news agency who is his confidant. Ning Yuan knew that Li Yan must have thought about divorcing her many times. Due to social influence, the female journalist waited for him for 10 years, but in the end, he still didn't stay with her. The people in the courtyard of the family members of the unit seem to know something, but she can only pretend not to know. Her salary is low, and this generation's divorce is subject to criticism. Everyone said he was just flirting outside of marriage. A man has a family in his heart and doesn't mind that she can't have a son, so she burned incense. Every night, she kept her eyes open until dawn, tears soaking her pillow, but during the day she still looked like a virtuous wife and mother managing the family. Time passed day by day, but Ning Yuan suffered from severe depression and insomnia all night long. Depression does not attack others like schizophrenia, but it can attack the patient themselves. She retired early from the company and her body began to suffer from various immune problems, including back pain and leg pain, and overall discomfort. This is a microcosm of the lives of millions of elderly virtuous wives and mothers. Ordinary and quiet, pain is like a dense needle piercing deep in the heart. She fantasizes countless times every late night. Back then, would she still marry Li Yan? And you, will you still marry your husband for the rest of your life? Ning Yuan looked absent-mindedly at the face in front of her. Li Yan reached out and patted her shoulder with some concern, saying, Ning Yuan. Ning Yuan was startled and instinctively took several steps back. No. Li Yan's hand froze in mid-air, and several people wearing red armbands around him looked at each other. What's wrong with this female-educated youth? Ning Yuan took a deep breath, calmed herself down, and forced a smile. I'm sorry, I was just a bit shocked. Li Yan looked at the girl with big eyes in front of him, her face turning pale, and she felt pity in her heart. It's okay, the team will make the decision for you, don't let go of a bad person. As he spoke, he glared fiercely at Rong Zhaonanchong leaning against the corner. Rong Zhao looked at Ning Yuan expressionlessly and kept her strange reaction in his eyes. What is the relationship between the little spy and the team secretary? Eyes flickering, abnormal. Bad element, what are you looking at? Squat down and be honest. A few red sleeves on the side scolded Rong Zhaonanchong immediately when they saw Li Yan speaking. Ning Yuan also instinctively looked towards Rong Zhaonanchong. He is very tall, wearing black framed glasses, with his head down. His bangs cover half of his face, and he squats against the wall in a pale and obedient manner. Ning Yuan instinctively took a few steps and stood in front of Rong Zhao South, saying, Don't do this. He didn't bully me or do anything wrong. The red armbands were all stunned, and Li Yan's face became serious again. Ning Yuan, don't be afraid of sheltering bad elements. Ning Yuan took a deep breath and looked up at Li Yan, saying, No, I'm not afraid or sheltering bad elements. Dr. Rong and I are talking to each other. Li Yan's face turned blue, looking at Ning Yuan with some disbelief. Although they haven't officially established a relationship and started dating, they are clearly looking at each other right. He went to the village team several times to inspect the work and assign tasks to the commune, and when he saw her, they all had something to say. She looked at him with shyness and joy in her eyes, and made an appointment to meet before officially starting the conversation. This morning, he heard that Ning Yuan had an accident last night, so he immediately brought someone over. He always believed that she was innocent, and someone must have bullied her last night. But why before she was about to break through the window paper and establish her relationship, did she change? A few red armbands looked at Li Yan's pale face and felt a bit confused. What was the situation? They also know that the young brigade secretary is a handsome young man from all over the country. Many girls like Li Yan, but he seems to have a crush on a female-educated youth. He heard that she was bullied by bad elements and rushed over early in the morning. But how come the current situation feels like Li Yan's shaving burden is hot? Ning Yuan didn't open her eyes and stopped looking at Li Yan. She clenched her fist and said, I don't know who spread the truth, but Dr. Rong and I have already issued a certificate in the village and will go to collect it tomorrow. God wants her to live again, she doesn't want to have any relationship with Li Yan. She needs to change her way of life in this lifetime, never again. Don't follow the old path of depression until old age. Before, I was not brave enough to fight, but now, those who have passed should bid farewell. Li Yan looked at her in a daze, not knowing why there was an indescribable pain in his heart. It seems like something is about to be cut off. He bit his teeth and clenched his fist, saying, Since Ning Jiqing hasn't been bullied, that's good. I still have a job, let's go first. As he spoke, he turned around and walked away with great strides. The other red armbands looked at each other and immediately followed. In no time, the area near the cowshed became clean. Ning Yuan couldn't help but blush under her eyes and leaned against the wall with a hint of emptiness. She is really going to say goodbye to her past life. Her heart is sour and worried about gains and losses. Rong Zhaonan patted his pants, stood up, and looked towards the direction Li Yan was leaving. That young secretary is your object. It's not pleasing to see me. Ning Yuan rubbed her brows wearily and said, no, Li Yan is very honest in these aspects. He will definitely not retaliate against you because of me. Although Li Yan is not a good husband, he is not considered a good father. But he has been very upright in his work all his life, rare to have a clean slate. Although he holds power in his hands, he has never been corrupted and never seeks personal gain. Not to mention giving him money to bribe him, even if someone gives him a basket of imported fruits, he either refuses or turns it in. He has been honest and upright throughout his life, and his wife and daughter have hardly ever been exposed to his glory. He is a truly honest and upright cadre. Look, that's how complicated it is. Rong Zhaonan looked at Ning Yuan and said Li Yan in a familiar tone, raising an eyebrow, you know him very well, why don't you ask him to help you get out of your current predicament and not marry me? Chapter 8. Her Two Husbands Meet, Part 1. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Upon hearing this, Ning Yuan's round face stiffened a bit and she said, Dr. Rong, you're joking. Secretary Li and I are just ordinary comrades, we can't trouble him like this. You've been overthinking it. Rong Zhaonan looked at Ning Yuan and said calmly, is that so? The little spy indeed has a secret, he didn't tell the truth. Ning Yuan doesn't want to be entangled in past emotions anymore. She casually wiped the sweat off her face and said, let's not talk about that, Dr. Rong. The old secretary promised to get us some old furniture and we need to go to the warehouse in the village's old classroom. Rong Zhaonan looked at the large cart she had dragged and raised his eyebrows, saying, okay, let's go. He wants to see how long this little spy can last. On that end, Rong Zhaonan dragged the scooter and went to the old classroom of the village primary school with Ning Yuan. At this point, Tang Xinjin returned to the educated youth spot full of questions. Before entering the yard, she saw two male educated youth carrying a person with a swollen nose and face, wrapped in a bloody bandage on a stretcher, walking back. Oh, Jianhua, you have to be careful next time, don't roll off the riverbank. That's right, with a broken head and cracked ribs, you have to recuperate and can't earn any work points. Two male educated youth were roast. Tang Xinjin looked at the injured person on the stretcher with a look of shock and anger, not who Wang Jianhua was. She told him this morning about Ning Yuan leaving the educated youth camp and going to live in the cowshed. Early in the morning, no one passed by near the cowshed after taking the ox to the ground. As long as he went to ambush Ning Yuan there, he could turn that slut into a genuine pair of broken shoes. Did Wang Jianhua end up being such a waste? Can Ning Yuan's petite stature even beat him up like this? Wang Jianhua also saw Tang Xinjin, Huang Xiehong, and Qin Xiaoxia. He glared at Tang Xinjin, twisted his head awkwardly, but then pulled at the wound on his head. He grinned in pain and said, oh my, be gentle when you two lift up. The two male educated youth quickly relaxed their movements and carried Wang Jianhua to the male educated youth's room. Upon seeing this, Huang Xiehong muttered to herself, Wang Jianhua is injured and only receives 3 sick leave pay points per day. We need to work more to help him make up for it, otherwise he will receive food based on his pay points by the end of the year. If his pay points are reduced, we will all be dragged down. The grain for the year-end educated youth team is calculated collectively. Tang Xinjin rolled her eyes inwardly, but with a helpless smile on her face, she said, all right, let's go. We'll have to take some food to see him later, after all, he's his comrade. She needs to ask Wang Jianhua, this idiot, what exactly happened. Huang Xiehong shook her head and sighed, Xinjin, you are really a good person. 3 female educated youth walked into the room with their front and back feet. As soon as Tang Xinjin entered the room, she instructed Qin Xiaoxia, don't you still have some oil tea sent from home? Take some oil tea and let's go see Wang Jianhua together. Qin Xiaoxia's face turned pale. She is from northern Guangxi and was sent over. Her family sent her a cup of oil tea, but she couldn't bear to eat it herself. Huang Xiahong's eyes lit up and she said, yes, Qin Xiaoxia, if you point it out, it's all your own comrades. Don't be stingy like capitalists. Let's get you scallions, ginger, and garlic. Qin Xiaoxia brought out something, and they could also share a little. Qin Xiaoxia was stared at by them, so she reluctantly took an old cookie box from her own box. Carefully took out some fried rice flours and earth oil tea from inside. She said reluctantly, I don't have meat and bone soup. This oil tea is not delicious without meat and bone soup. Tang Jinjin smiled generously and said, I have brown sugar in my box. Let me use some brown sugar to make oil tea and stir-fry rice. Huang Xiahong immediately went to help Tang Jinjin drag out the box and said, Jinjin is still generous. But Tang Jinjin noticed something was wrong as soon as she opened the box. Her cookie box is in a passive state. She opened it and saw that except for 5 yuan, there was nothing left inside, including a whole bag of cookies and sugar. My big white rabbit candy in evergreen biscuits. Tang Jinjin's eyes darkened. Everlasting green cream onion flavored biscuits and big white rabbit milk candy are both high-end and scarce goods in Shanghai. Tickets are needed in provincial cities, but even in rural areas where there is money, they cannot be bought. It must be Ning Yuan who stole my things. Tang Jinjin's face twisted. She couldn't bear to eat that packet of cookies, and once she got it, she only ate 1 piece a week. That shameless little shoe not only flirted with the person she liked, but also stole her things. Huang Xiahong also furrowed her eyebrows and was filled with righteous indignation. As soon as she got close to the person who was sent to reform and take away, she became corrupt and corrupt. Now she has become a thief. Qin Xiaoxia was forced to take things out just now, and now she murmurs softly, did the cookies and milk candy all come from Ning Yuan's family? But how dare she speak loudly? Huang Xiahong exclaimed indignantly, Jinjin, let's go to the village team and sue her. As thieves, we need to hang up a sign and wander the streets. The exercise has just passed, and at this time, it is customary for the countryside to parade the streets to show off thieves, and educated youth need to keep records. Tang Jinjin gritted her teeth and stood up, I heard Vice Secretary Li Yan has arrived. Let's go find him to preside over justice. She will never let go of Ning Yuan. Today, she will force Li Yan to handle Ning Yuan personally. Ning Yuan and Rong Zhaonanchong spent the whole afternoon swapping things, and finally dragged a cart back to the small dilapidated house in the cowshed with the tattered items they had bought from the abandoned storage room of the village primary school. She held a large stack of old newspapers and watched Rong Zhaonanchong effortlessly dragging a large cart of broken cabinets, tables, and stools along the side. How strong! Ning Yuan muttered softly. This person looked at a thin and tall weak scholar who couldn't eat enough, yet he still had such great strength. Rong Zhaonanchong placed the cart in front of the house and pressed the black framed glasses on his nose bridge, saying, Do you want to get things into the house now? Ning Yuan shook her head and said, Let's first paste the newspaper and fix the roof. These furniture need to be taken apart, pieced together, and repaired before they can be used. The space inside the house is too small to be opened. Rong Zhaonanchong watched as Ning Yuan moved the newspaper into the house and came out to retrieve the repair tools borrowed from the village team with a dignified expression. He squinted his eyes and said, Can you fix it? Ning Yuan rolled up her sleeves and nodded, I know a bit. Let's fix it first before we talk. Rong Zhaonanchong said, You're quite daring to think and act. Halfway through his words, he suddenly raised his sharp eyes to look at the path in front of the cowshed, and a wary cold light flashed in his eyes. Someone has come. Ning Yuan happened to see his cold and imposing demeanor, and instinctively took a tight breath. But the next moment, Rong Zhaonan lowered his head and stood behind her, instantly becoming the silent and non-existent weak scholar again. Ning Yuan almost suspected that she had hallucinations, and before she could react, she heard footsteps. She looked towards the end of the path. Sure enough, Tang Jinjin, Li Yan, Huang Xiehong, Qin Xiaoxia, as well as a few red armbands they saw at noon, and even some villagers watching the excitement, followed over. Ning Yuan's delicate eyebrows furrowed and she said, surprisingly, we came together. Li Yan actually got mixed up with Tang Jinjin and his gang. Huang Xiehong has always been Tang Jinjin's vanguard. When she saw the furniture on the cart next to Ning Yuan from a long distance, she started shouting, "Nah, I say she's a thief, right? You see, not only did she steal things from us educated youth, but Ning Yuan also stole things from the team. Isn't that a desk and a chair?" Li Yan remained silent and only approached to look at the cart of things. Although they are all broken, they are indeed office desks and chairs. The red armbands and villagers who followed also began to discuss in a low voice when they saw the situation. Tang Jinjin looked at the cart of things and sneered inwardly, really a thief. She showed a helpless expression on her face and said, "Ah, Ning Yuan, why are you with bad elements and start stealing public property from the team? You will be sentenced to prison." Ning Yuan looked puzzled and said, "What are you talking about? These things are all old office furniture that I borrowed from the team. The old branch secretary has loan receipts in black and white, and I promise to repair them and return them in the future." A villager who was watching the excitement also spoke up, "We did see the village accountant lie following Ning Yuan to the village primary school warehouse this morning." Li Yan suddenly felt relieved and looked at Tang Jinjin, "I just said that Ning Yuan is not such a person." Tang Jinjin choked and looked aggrieved, "I also misunderstood what Xiehong said." Huang Xiehong met Li Yan's gaze, her chubby face turning red. Subconsciously, she scolded Ning Yuan, "Well, it wasn't because you stole Jinjin's money and things that we misunderstood you." Ning Yuan suddenly took the large water ladle next to her and splashed the stinky water stained with cow dung onto Huang Xiehong's chubby black face. "That's the dirty water from brushing cattle that Rong Zhaonan hasn't had time to clean up this morning." Chapter 9. Her Two Husbands Meet, Part 2. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ning Yuan suddenly splashed Huang Xiehong with a refreshing and foul odor. Ning Yuan, Huang Xiehong, Tang Jinjin, Qin Xiaoxia, and even Li Yan and others were stunned. In my impression, a girl who speaks softly, has a good temper, and is easy to talk about, actually comes up and splashes people. You dare to splash me with dirty water, you. I'll fight with you. Huang Xiehong found that her foul smell made everyone instinctively pinch their noses. She was both angry and resentful, and lowered her head to rush towards Ning Yuan. When a stinky, chubby, black cannon-like woman bumped into her, Ning Yuan quickly flashed and grabbed Rong Zhaonan, who was hiding behind her as an invisible person. So Huang Xiehong seized her momentum with a thud, crashed into the wooden cart, and then fell on a big horse. Oh! Woo-woo! She splashed dirty water on me, she splashed me. It smells so bad. Huang Xiehong lost her face. She covered her face and sat on the ground, feeling dizzy, crying loudly. Rong Zhaonan's cold and beautiful narrow eyes glanced at Huang Xiehong with annoyance, making a noise. Subsequently, his gaze fell on the small hand that was tugging at his wrist, and the little spy pulled at him quite hard. Ning Yuan, how could you become angry and use dirty water to splash people? Tang Jinjin looked displeased and helped Huang Xiehong, then went to see Li Yan. Li Yan's gaze fell on Ning Yuan holding Rong Zhaonan's hand, his gaze complex and gloomy. Ning Yuan looked coldly at Tang Jinjin and Huang Xiehong and said, "She asked for it. She allowed Huang Xiehong to speak recklessly and splash dirty water on me. Slandering me as a thief and not allowing me to splash her dirty water. She has been wanting to take action for a long time. These people really see her as easy to bully, right? They keep coming out one after another. Tang Zhenjin instinctively took a step back as she watched her staring at her. How did Ning Yuan become so fierce? Did she really break the jar? Tang Zhenjin was not a fuel-efficient lamp either, and immediately took out her evergreen biscuit box with red eyes. My things are all packed in this cookie box, and one of the ancestral jade chili peppers is missing. It was also missing when we went to work in the fields this morning. It's not you who stole it. Huang Xiehong and Qin Xiaoxia were both stunned. Isn't Tang Zhenjin only missing cookies and sugar? Why is she missing 5 yuan again? Where do jadeite chili peppers come from? Upon hearing the 4 words, jade chili, Ning Yuan's eyes immediately turned cold to Tang Zhenjin and said, "You fart." Those surnamed Tang dare to think about her jade chili peppers. Tang Zhenjin first gave them a warning glance, then provocatively looked at Ning Yuan. My cookie box contains jade chili, cookies, sugar, and 10 yuan, but now there are only 5 yuan left. I hid it well and it wasn't stolen. Last month, when she was rummaging through Ning Yuan's luggage, she accidentally saw her beautiful jade chili pepper. Despite being coaxed and threatened, that little slut reluctantly agreed to give her as a gift during the Chinese New Year. Since she agreed, that thing was hers. Li Yan frowned and asked Huang Xiehong and Qin Xiaoxia, "Really?" The chubby Huang Xiehong was a bit stunned, and Tang Zhenjin's resolute words made her a little confused. "Ah, this." Qin Xiaoxia lowered her eyes and said, "It seems so. A few years ago, there were all sorts of terrifying things happening. Tang Zhenjin's family was the one who defeated others and climbed up at that time, with a high status. Although she is much better now, Tang Zhenjin has obtained a family heirloom and holds a high position among educated youth. Now Tang Zhenjin is going to kill Ning Yuan, and she dare not offend Tang Zhenjin." Li Yan's eyebrows furrowed. Stealing things and money, although the amount is not significant. But this matter can be big or small. Even if it doesn't constitute imprisonment, once Ning Yuan is accused and reported to the Educated Youth Office, she may really be punished. It will also have to be recorded, which will affect Ning Yuan's entire life. Li Yan looked at Ning Yuan and didn't believe that a gentle, shy, and somewhat introverted girl was like this. Ning Yuan exchanged a glance with him, didn't open her face, and involuntarily clenched her fist. "Why don't you search again? Did someone else take it wrong?" Li Yan felt a bit disappointed and still looked at Tang Zhenjin with a straight face. Rong Zhaonanchong remained behind them, silently watching the scene. Watching the interaction between Ning Yuan and Li Yan, he curved his lips with a hint of mockery. Tang Zhenjin listened to Li Yan's words and maintained Ning Yuan's intentions both inside and outside. She felt extremely uncomfortable in her heart, lifted her eyes but with tears in her eyes, and asked, "Li Yan, are you thinking I'm lying? Why don't you suspect that Ning Yuan has gone bad talking to bad people? Ning Yuan is already a tattered shoe sleeping with another man, and he still needs to protect that woman to question himself. She will never spare Ning Yuan. That slut will be recorded and labeled as a thief for his whole life." She lowered her eyes and said in a tearful voice, "Forget it, I know you have a good relationship with Ning Yuan, and it's only right to protect her." Her words accurately reflect Li Yanjing's personality, and she absolutely cannot accept being questioned for fairness in public. Sure enough, Li Yan frowned and glanced at the several red armbands that followed him. He saw that they and the surrounding villagers were all watching him. Li Yan could only frown and say, "Tang Jiqing, your words have gone too far. As the leader of the brigade, I cannot just listen to your one-sided words." Tang Zhenjin bit her lip and felt very aggrieved. "That's why I came to confront you face-to-face, otherwise why would I go find you?" Huang Xiehong, who smelled so bad, reached out her chubby black fist and angrily circled, saying, "Yes, Ning Yuan is stealing things, stealing money, and bullying me. This kind of person can't do it without reporting to Jiqing. As a leader, should someone introduce someone to Ning Yuan and you?" Huang Xiehong, did the spoonful of stinky water just now not wash your mouth clean and owe you a beating? Ning Yuan suddenly interrupted her coldly. Huang Xiehong looked at Ning Yuan, although petite, with her hands already raised high and the flesh on her chubby face trembling. You! Dare you! If you talk nonsense, I dare to hit you. What's wrong? Ning Yuan sneered and rolled up her sleeves. Li Yan immediately stood in front of her and advised in a deep voice, don't do this, even if it's reasonable, it will become unreasonable. I will definitely find out the truth. This is a contradiction within the people. Anyway, he doesn't want anything to happen to Ning Yuan. Ning Yuan looked at the man who was protecting her in front of her, looking upright. As the youngest secretary of the Commune Brigade, he is handsome, enthusiastic and just, holds a high position, and has always been popular among the village girls. Plus, he graduated from high school and has the highest education in the commune, possessing both culture and knowledge. It is also very popular among female educated youth here. If he hadn't returned to the city, who would have been able to marry him would have been envied by the entire team and several villages. This is also why no matter how much she tries to please Tang Jinjin, she is isolated in a small group, both openly and secretly. Ning Yuan was about to say something when someone suddenly pulled her arm. Rong Zhaonanchong pulled her to his side and lightly pushed his glasses down the bridge of his nose, saying, Vice Secretary Li, you've worked hard. My beloved is not that kind of person. Li Yan was taken aback, clenched his fist, and looked at him coldly. If it weren't for being with you, she wouldn't have encountered such a thing. Chapter 10. Her ability to reverse the rake has increased again. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Rong Zhaonanchong squinted his eyes, but before he could speak, Tang Jinjin couldn't take it anymore. She's not here to see how two men are protecting Ning Yuan. Tang Jinjin gritted her teeth with a black face and looked at Huang Xiehong and Qin Xiaoxia on the side, saying, Speak up. Tang Jinjin looked at Huang Xiehong and Qin Xiaoxia and said, Xiehong and Xiaoxia, do you think the things in this cookie box are missing this morning? Huang Xiehong hated Ning Yuan to death and nodded desperately, that's right, I saw with my own eyes that Jinjin's money and breakfast were gone. It was Ning Yuan who stole them. Qin Xiaoxia hesitated and said, the things in Jinjin's box are missing, and there are only 5 yuan left. She didn't lie, she just spoke ambiguously, and as for what others think, she can't care. As soon as they testified, everyone immediately began to discuss. Especially Tang Jinjin's popularity among educated youth has always been high, coupled with Ning Yuan's self-indulgence and the bad elements who have set up cowsheds in the capital. The following educated youth all helped Tang Jinjin speak up. Yeah, everyone started working early in the morning, but you weren't there. She is a decent person. Yesterday, she thought you had an accident with Ning Yuan. She even ran off her shoes to ask someone to help you. That's right, Ning Yuan, you stole things without conscience. Li Yan saw the angry expression of the educated youth and looked at Ning Yuan with a furrowed brow, saying, Ning Yuan, you. Just as he was about to say something, a cold voice suddenly interrupted him and said, you haven't seen Ning Yuan steal anything with your own eyes. Your words are unfounded. Is there any evidence? Ning Yuan looked at Rong Zhaonanchong, who had been silent for a while, and was somewhat surprised. He had always been silent in front of everyone due to his special identity. Surprisingly, he spoke twice in a row and helped her speak. Sure enough, as soon as Rong Zhaonanchong spoke, the attention of those around him instantly focused on him. Huang Xiehong pointed at him angrily and said, you are a bad person. It's you who led Ning Yuan astray. Let her steal things. Her angry scolding immediately resonated with the educated youth and villagers. Yeah, maybe he's the bad guy who instigated Ning Jiqing to steal things. You see, Ning Yuan wasn't like this before. She even started hitting people. She must have been influenced by bad elements. Ning Yuan listened more and more outrageously, finally understanding why Rong Zhaonan always lowered his sense of presence and never spoke out in front of others easily, people who are labeled as bad people, even if they are innocent. When something bad happens in a group, most people will blame this person. This is the power of prejudice. Wait a minute. This has nothing to do with Dr. Rong. I didn't steal anything, let alone money. I have evidence. Ning Yuan couldn't help but block in front of Rong Zhao's south and shouted with all her strength. Suddenly, it covered the noise and contemptuous curses of others. Li Yan gave Rong Zhaonan a cold glance, adding to the chaos. Later, he looked at Ning Yuan and said in a deep voice, Ning Jiqing, if you have any evidence, just bring it out. The brigade will not wrongly accuse a good person. As soon as Li Yan spoke as the leader of the brigade, the villagers and educated youth all quieted down. Ning Yuan turned around and entered the small house next to the cowshed. After a while, she hurriedly came out and raised the things in her hand, saying, Tang Xinjian, is this the biscuit and sugar you're talking about? Now there is extreme material scarcity, so there is so much commotion for high-end biscuits and candies. After several decades, saying what is happening now seems like a joke, but Tang Xinjian is more of a borrowed topic. Ning Yuan has a pack of cookies and a small handful of big white rabbit candy in her hand. Tang Xinjian's eyes lit up immediately, pointing to her hand and saying, my perpetual green biscuits, and the big white rabbit milk candy. Ning Yuan, this idiot, even took out all the evidence. Wait a minute. There's less sugar. Tang Xinjian glared angrily at Ning Yuan and said, you even stole my food, leaving only 5 big white rabbit milk candies and my jade chili peppers. These candy cookies are not even available in the countryside, she is reluctant to eat them casually. Ning Yuan said coldly, this is something my family sent from Shanghai, why can't I eat it? You're lying, this was sent by my family from Shanghai. Tang Xinjian sneered. Ning Yuan gave her, it's her. Huang Xiehong also covered her head and said loudly, yes, we all saw it. It was sent by the family of Xinjian. As soon as Huang Xiehong finished speaking, people around him began to discuss. I don't know what else Ning Jiqing has to say now. He even went to the countryside to support rural construction. It would be good if he didn't come and steal our things. Tisk. Ning Yuan suddenly took out a package slip from her pocket with no expression and said, this is my evidence. There is a postmark sent from Shanghai on it. You can take a look at what it says. Tang Xinjian was taken aback and suddenly had a bad premonition. Why does Ning Yuan still keep this package receipt? A few months ago, she watched as the other party threw it into the trash can. Li Yanyan took it over and looked at the package list, reciting, a box of perpetual green biscuits, a pack of big white rabbit milk candy, recipient. Ning Yuan. As soon as the words fell, everyone looked at each other in confusion. Ning Yuan has evidence, sugar is hers. Alright, I have proven that I have sugar and cookies. How can you prove that something belongs to you? Ning Yuan sneered. The cookies and candy she gave to Tang Xinjian, which she couldn't bear to eat herself, became evidence that this woman falsely accused her. Fortunately, later on, in order to collect stamps, she left a Shanghai postmark stamp and picked up the package list without throwing it away. Tang Xinjian's face turned a bit pale as she instinctively squeezed Huang Xiehong's arm and said, that only proves that you have had candy, cookies, and you have already eaten your cookies and sugar. This is mine. Huang Xiehong's chubby arm was pinched to the point of pain, and she quickly nodded, ah, right, right. Rong Zhaonan leaned against the cart and suddenly said coldly, whoever claims, whoever provides evidence. Now that she has proven it, it's your turn to provide evidence. Do you have any markings on that jade chili? Tang Xinjian stared at him angrily and said, Xiaoxia and Xiehong both saw that I had received the package. Besides, it's not your turn as a bad person to talk here. How does she know what marks are on that jade chili carving? Li Yan gave Rong Zhaonan another warning glance, intending to make him shut up. But he still said sternly to Tang Jinjin, Tang Jiqing, who claims that whoever provides evidence is right. Besides your roommate, is there any written evidence to prove that these cookies, sugar, and jade chili peppers belong to you? Tang Jinjin bit her lips and, under the gaze of everyone, her eyes turned red. There's not enough evidence, and I don't have much to say. Just treat cookies, sugar, and even jade chili peppers as hers. I misunderstood. All right. Speaking, she looked aggrieved and turned around wanting to run. She has evidence, and Ning Yuan has physical evidence. Anyway, this matter cannot be explained clearly, and Ning Yuan's reputation cannot be improved. At some point, Ning Yuan took a few steps to block in front of her and said coldly wait a moment, Tang Jiqing, is that all you want to do? Tang Jinjin looked at her unhappily and said, I don't care anymore, okay. Ning Yuan sneered and said, but I'm concerned, and I'm missing 5 yuan. Now I suspect that the 5 yuan in your hand was stolen from me. Not only Tang Jinjin, but also a group of people such as Huang Xiehong and Li Yan were stunned. What does this mean? However, Rong Zhaonan's eyes flashed with a strange light as he covered half of his face with the lenses, staring at Ning Yuan, lost in thought. Tang Jinjin looked at her incredulously and said, what are you saying?